Hi, in this episode, we get to talk to Pngwn about Gradio AI and what he does at work. But before that, here's a word from our sponsor. Enjoy.
Vercel is the platform for front-end developers, providing the speed and reliability innovators need to create at the moment of inspiration. Founded by the creators of Next.js, Vercel has zero configuration support for 35 plus front-end frameworks, including SvelteKit. We enable the world's largest brands like Under Armour, eBay, and Nintendo to iterate faster and create quality software. Try out Vercel today to experience the easiest way to use Svelte.
Hello. Welcome back to Svelte Radio. This time, we're very calm and happy. No, we're always happy at Svelte Radio. Welcome.
Welcome.
We're here. We're back again. And we have a guest this time. Say hello.
Hello.
Hey.
We're not going to introduce.
Yeah, I might need some names here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. But he's so well known in the Svelte community. His name
As
is
a
like
cute
a
little character.
penguin emoji. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a penguin showing up everywhere. So, yeah. Yeah. So welcome to another episode. That was a very long, weird intro, but we're here. And we have all of the hosts this time around. Say hello, maybe. Hi.
Hi.
Woo.
Yeah,
Hey.
I don't know if we want to do this names and voices because this is like 5 people. But hi,
Yeah.
I'm Sean.
Hi, I'm Anthony.
Hi,
Oh.
I'm Brittany.
I'm Kevin. And then our guest, Mr. Pngwn, or maybe not Mr. Well, what's the title there?
Whatever.
Whatever.
Overlord
Wow.
Penguin.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
People just went
It's
for
like-
it.
So, Pngwn, you're the creator of MDSveX, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the
That's
small
true.
little thing that we've all used a bit, and you've been around in the Svelte community for a good while. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am a penguin on the internet. I've been involved in Svelte for, I don't even know how many years, like 4 years or something, 5 years. I created MDSveX. I work at Huggingface on Gradio, and I'm here to talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about.
Yeah. So we thought we would talk about Gradio and AI, and I guess Huggingface in general, and why you use Svelte, what Gradio is, and all that good fun stuff. So, but yeah, all this interesting stuff. But yeah, so Pngwn, you've done a bunch of talks that are pretty worthwhile to watch. One about building your own REPL, which is mind-blowing to me. And recently at Svelte Summit, you also did a talk on, what was it about? It was a talk without slides.
On storytelling, right?
On
Yeah.
storytelling, yeah.
Yeah. So
I thought it was a nice breath of relief from like the technical talks, like just to have something that was more about just how to have a good talk and a good story.
yeah, it was a line. I think I was just after Sean, so it was kind of the strange meta talks section of the conference. But yeah, I felt like doing something a little bit different. I think it can be difficult to do non-technical talks at a technical conference, depending like who you are. And I think that, sometimes, I thought it was an important talk, the way we kind of tell stories and encouraging people to tell their stories. But it can be, if a stranger to the community gets up and does a non-technical talk, everyone's like, why is this person not talking about Svelte? What has this got to do with kind of tech and with Svelte at a Svelte conference? So it's kind of, there's an element of, I was in a position where I could do a talk like that, and I felt it was important, and I felt I should kind of, use that platform, like, because, you say I'm pretty well known in the Svelte community, so no one's going to like question like whether or not I should be on stage kind of speaking. So it kind of gets that out of the way just because of, not that that's correct, of course, that's a bit of a, that's a whole discussion in itself. But
the boo crews.
Something a bit different.
The boo crew's not going to boo you off the stage.
No,
I was the boo crew apparently. Yeah.
Did you not feel that you might disappoint people by not following on from your previous BrisTech type talk that's heavily technical?
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to do it was because of the expectations that I knew there would be. I knew, like, I've got a bit of a track record of doing pretty deep technical kind of, dives into topics or kind of live coding things, and I love doing those things. But part of it was kind of, it's our first in-person conference. It would be nice to do. It was the kind of talk that does well when you've got an audience in front of you. You've got kind of people that you can kind of talk to. It kind of felt more intimate because of, it was a nice sized kind of group and stuff. But yeah, part of it was actually people are going to be expecting this, so I'd like to kind of mess with those expectations. I think that was part of it helped with the impact to a degree. But I was definitely nervous about the talk. It's a risky talk. I'd kind of joked to Rich. I met Rich in New York a couple of months ago, and I kind of joked to Rich that the most kind of radical thing you can do in a tech talk is be sincere. And so I was kind of like, and there was an element of, if I'm going to go on stage and ask people to kind of to tell their story and to kind of to be honest and to kind of take risks in that way, then I have to do the same myself. So there was a kind of an element of kind of, I don't know, kind of following my own advice on, if there's something you actually want to talk about, something that you feel is important, then you should kind of talk about it using whatever platforms you have. So it was quite in some ways it's a kind of like, it echoes some of my reasons for being involved in open source and involved in tech in the first place.
So as someone who does talks and as someone who watches a lot of talks, I just wanted to compliment you. Like, that was one of the bravest, and also it's very raw and like definitely expectation breaking talks I've ever seen. So well done on that. I think everyone was somewhat dubious. Like everyone's like staring at the black screens, like expecting some slides to show up at any point, and you just kept not delivering on that.
I thought at the end it was like the name of the talk was "I told you my dog wouldn't walk" or something like that, and then I expected like at the end there to be some like big thing about like the dog not walking.
No, that was more of a red herring, the title.
Clickbait.
But yeah.
Just clickbait.
It was clickbait.
How to fill a room. I'm going to do a talk called How to Fill a Room, and it's all about the title of Pngwn's talks.
I have a sense that you are one of the more you're one of the people that think about code in a more holistic fashion. Like, even though you're very technical, you're on the Svelte core team, plus you maintain MDSveX, and I don't know what else. You definitely view it as like code plus humans. I don't know if you have any thoughts on like how community and code intermix.
Yeah.
You seem to care quite a bit. Yeah,
I do, and I don't like. I just view technology as a kind of a means to an end, really. Like it's a great enabler. I'm very conflicted, for example, on I often joke that the internet was a mistake, half joke, and it's true. It's exacerbated a lot of the existing kind of injustices and prejudices. It's kind of amplified some of those. But in other ways, it's kind of access to information. If you look at things like, I don't know, as a kind of very popular example, something like Khan Academy, making a high quality education available to a huge amount of people worldwide, and has been kind of really successful in democratizing, in the true sense, not in the investor sense, education. And I think that when I first got involved in Svelte, I was mostly focusing on community. That's kind of how I got my starts. There was 30 people in the Discord, and people like Rich and Conduitry were really generous in terms of kind of helping me understand. This is back kind of Svelte 2 time. Now we have 45,000 members on Discord, and obviously no one person can manage that. But I found it very rewarding, kind of helping people out and stuff. But I think what's more interesting is when maybe someone that you've helped and then someone that person has helped, this kind of chain of helpers goes on to build something incredible or something impactful. And I don't think tools can be successful without a strong community. I don't think without the people to build the things, to write the content, to present new kinds of, I don't know, whether it's tutorials or documentation, whether it's kind of novel uses of a technology. I think those things kind of prove out a technology, but they also kind of they communicate to others the possibilities of a specific tool or a set of tools and so on and so forth. And Svelte has very much been successful because of, the community. The tech honestly hasn't changed that much. Like, we've seen huge growth over the past kind of 12, 18 months since Svelte 3, or, a little bit after the launch of Svelte 3, and the Svelte hasn't changed. There's more hype, there's more people building, there's more people doing interesting things. And it is because of that community. And one of the things that sets maybe the Svelte community apart is it's very friendly. It's very very welcoming to people, but it's also, the people are very engaged. I get this feedback a lot that people like the Svelte community, not just because it's welcoming. There are other welcoming kind of tech communities out there. There are other knowledgeable tech communities out there, but because people are still willing to kind of engage in conversation and try hard to keep it kind of civil and friendly and welcoming and help like newcomers and experienced people alike. And that dynamic is, in my experience, relatively unique to keep that kind of almost small community feel as a community grows, exponentially. Like, it's grown like enormously in the past couple of years, where at first the growth was slow. But it is this idea of ecosystem, this idea of Svelte as an ecosystem instead of Svelte as a library. It's something that we're thinking about at work. How do you go from library and a couple of integrations to ecosystem? And when you start thinking in terms of ecosystem, that phrase specifically, when you think of ecology, it's about, our relationship to various things. And it's the humans are at the center of that. It's like, what is our relationship? How do all of these things relate together? And getting the most out of your community and, almost empowering your community to do the work is, to build the interesting things, to find those new use cases, to find those new applications is, for me, the difference between a success and a failure. There are many open source libraries that have existed for eons and they've got no usage.
Playing devil's advocate here, do you think that there is some element of the community being very friendly and welcoming and helpful because nobody's being forced to use Svelte for their job yet? There's no disgruntled React developer that's been forced to use Svelte that's turned up to the Discord with a chip on their shoulder and gone, you know what, I hate this framework, I hate these people, I want to use React, but my job demands it, therefore I'm just going to abuse you all until I get what I want. Is there a notion of maybe we're still a bit lucky in that respect? Absolutely.
You have when you're not forced to use something for work, when it's all personal project, you have the liberty of choice. If you're working with a tool, you don't have that choice. And as soon as you take choice away from someone, they feel trapped. And I think we'll see that in satisfaction surveys, being pragmatic. It's like, we celebrate these kind of satisfaction surveys and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's because people are going to be happy with the tool that they've chosen to use for a pet project that may only have existed for 3 months. When people are forced to adopt a legacy Svelte, pick up a legacy Svelte code base and figure out like what on earth the previous developers were thinking for 3, 4, 5 years, they're going to be a lot less happy about some of the design decisions. And, you're likely to see questions around, why is this a thing in Svelte? Who thought two-way bindings were a good idea? Those kinds of questions when it gets abused. In the same way that when React patterns get abused, people question the actual design of the feature itself rather than the usage. And that's totally valid. And we'll see that in the next few years if we're successful.
That was Sean's talk from Svelte Summit. He talked about that, right?
Talked about a lot of things. I'm gonna insert a call to action here. It just so happens that the State of JS 2022 survey just started. So if you want to voice your dissatisfaction with Svelte, go ahead.
Also, mention Svelte Radio as the podcast that you're listening to.
And mention Svelte Radio, please. Write it in, because they're not going to write us in until we force ourselves onto the regular list.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But yeah, so I call this a second framework syndrome, or like it's a good thing, like in a way that like everyone comes here by choice. It's one of the things that I shouted out when I wrote about why I enjoy Svelte. So yeah, I strongly agree, and it's pretty interesting that I think I call back to Sophie Alpert, the former manager of the React's core team. She was doing a keynote for ReactConf, and she talked a little bit about like, React is the first framework that a lot of people know, sometimes even before JavaScript, and that imposes a huge level of responsibility on React to be accessible to beginners that most libraries do not. And it's not necessarily a good thing, actually. It's just different. It's just qualitatively different. It means that everyone who chooses Svelte chooses it as a second framework, and then the community that we get is more enjoyable for some people as a result.
I do think we should celebrate it whilst we, not say whilst we can, but we have something to celebrate. We are in that position, so I think we should celebrate it. I definitely don't think that we should go, this, that, and the other. So
I think there's a lot of new frameworks, and Svelte is still doing really well comparatively to them. And I appreciate Pete's perspective and how you connect everything back to kind of the underlying ideology of how the community makes the framework a little bit. And I love that.
I often kind of joke that Svelte isn't a technology, it's a philosophy. And you see this quite a lot in terms of it's frustrating sometimes when people say, where's this library, where's this integration? But there's this kind of minimalist kind of approach, this use the bare minimum. If the library's doing too much, then maybe write something simple for yourself. And there's an element of that side of things as well and I think what's interesting actually, Sean, talking about the kind of attracting beginners is, we attract a different kind of beginner, because one of the way that Svelte is framed is it's very similar to just HTML. So people often come because it's an easy to use framework, air quotes. We do attract people with maybe limited experience, and then when they actually want to start doing more complex stuff, they don't necessarily have the kind of like that heavy JavaScript background to kind of apply to their Svelte. And so we kind of have a different kind of beginner problem, I guess, but it's because of the nature of the framework. And I guess this is how, there's a whole thing around the design of your framework, the philosophy behind your framework will dictate what kinds of users you attract and what kinds of challenges they have when they want to go from, beginner to intermediate to advanced. But that kind of minimal approach maybe doesn't work well for those users. They're not as comfortable kind of like writing their own kind of simple libraries as maybe a more experienced developer.
Maybe not for this podcast, but I would love to get your thoughts on how to do that transition from beginner to intermediate to advanced and get like a course layout. I would love to do a course like that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, nowadays, Svelte is more popular than React, as we've seen on NPM trends, right? So,
you just ruined my unpopular opinion.
So sorry.
I was saving that. Thank you.
Celebrate it whilst you can.
Celebrate it. Yes.
Yeah. So for those of you,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, there's someone somewhere is using some build tool or I don't know, some automation that it's just like downloading Svelte like crazy.
So I asked Laurie Voss about it. He's the co-founder of NPM, and he said that Theo was right in that tweet that the CI is like messed up. So something somewhere is just
like the Svelte CI.
I think Theo said that the NPM or somebody's CI. Oh, he said some Svelte dev CI. So like you said, like somebody's CI is messed up downloading Svelte.
Yeah. I mean, Svelte's a compiler, right? It should see fewer downloads.
Gatsby and Next had similar bumps recently too. So they had like a huge spike and then it went back down. It's weird.
It's conspiracy.
Maybe it's one of these unpackaged type tool, whatever.
Yeah. I wanted to mention, like, we talked a bit about, like, we had a different kind of beginner, and I just wanted to shout out the Kit documentation that has a section on web standards, which is very nice to see. It's basically about how to use fetch, form data, stream APIs and stuff like that, which I think a lot of people, they don't know how to actually use web standards. They know like some stuff, but yeah, so just a shout out. I think we could actually expand on that even more.
Using the platform.
Yes.
I think one of the earliest, I think the first Svelte Summit or maybe Svelte Society Day, we had people from like a few governments, right? Like I think Norway and Mexico, that they were putting it in curriculums. So yeah, I definitely don't want to give the impression that this Svelte is not suitable for beginners. Actually, it's easier to learn just because it's closer to HTML. But that's beside the point. You don't have to learn functional programming or some fork of JavaScript to do that. So anyway, I feel like I've gone on this rant. Did we want to spend any time talking about MDSveX before we move on to Gradio?
I'm thinking maybe we do another podcast episode on just MDSveX.
Okay.
Head into Gradio and Huggingface maybe.
Yes. What is
sounds
Huggingface?
All right.
Sure.
What is Huggingface? Huggingface is a company that is building basically we build libraries, platforms, and services to make AI as accessible as possible. The context around this is, and sometimes when people who aren't familiar with the AI ecosystems hear this, they're like, what's the big deal? But like, it's genuinely the Wild West out there. There's a lot of code a lot of code isn't released for some kind of research. A lot of code is, very difficult to make use of, to get to work yourself. So having a kind of a consistent set of libraries and platform where we can, it's easy to use state-of-the-art machine learning models is a bit of a game changer. So the core, I guess, the heart of Huggingface is the transformers library. That's kind of what everything is built on top of. And it's a consistent transformers is an architecture in machine learning, but it's also a library that you can use. And we make available lots and lots of state-of-the-art models that you can use relatively easily. And we've got a bunch of, we've got a whole, we're building an ecosystem. So it's not everything kind of works together. We've got a Git host, we've got a hub where you can host your models and your data sets and even your little kind of Python apps. That's our spaces, which we'll come to shortly. But also, we've got a series of libraries. We've even got APIs where you can easily, models that are hosted on the hub can easily be deployed to an API, and you can then just like make predictions using an API instead of needing to kind of write your own code. So it started off as just focused on NLP, but now it's pretty much anything goes.
NLP being natural language processing programming?
Yeah, not neural linguistic programming.
I was going to say,
I have some friends also into that. Yes.
Yeah.
Mostly consists of looking yourself in the mirror and telling yourself that you have confidence today.
You love you.
Being very sad.
Yeah.
No, but actually, like one of my smartest friends does that, and like it works. So I'm actually very hesitant to be skeptical about it because
that's kind of what we were saying before we started recording. We're going to have smiles on our faces and be happy. We just made ourselves happy.
Yeah, and I think it worked.
You have to manifest. One analogy that I've heard is Huggingface is GitHub for machine learning. Didn't make sense to me 2 years ago. Makes a little bit more sense to me today. It seems like that is the way that, for example, Stable Diffusion distributes model weights. And like basically, like, is it just GitHub on steroids? Like, what does Huggingface do differently that GitHub doesn't do?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the biggest thing is kind of Git LFS is free. So when you're dealing with, which it isn't on GitHub for reference. So when you're dealing with models are huge, checkpoints are huge. These things are very large, so you need some large file storage, and that could get very expensive on GitHub, whereas that's free on Hugging Face. So it is a Git host, and that's our kind of, in terms of the public facing kind of part of Hugging Face from a product point of view, it looks like it's just like a Git host, and it's definitely very good for hosting your models and your data sets. But there's a bunch of kind of, I think one thing that Hugging Face does differently is, for example, you can buy compute. You can't buy compute from GitHub. GitHub isn't like a way to host your code. I mean, it's very general purpose, so obviously it can't be. But because we're focused on machine learning, it's like if you need compute, for example, on whether that's we've got inference APIs, so more kind of production focused. You could upload a model to an inference API and use one of our APIs to run your productions. But we've also got this idea of spaces, which is a way you could think of it like like GitHub Pages or something like that, except it's an actual like Python app with a server running behind it. And you can, if you need a larger GPU, then you can buy a larger GPU. If you need an A100 for your predictions, then you can buy that directly from, you can just upgrade your space in the GUI. And then you could use that as an API if you wanted to. But, we would encourage for production use cases, go into one of our dedicated production services. It's going to be more performance. But I think that's we have a set of, because we're focused on it's a pretty broad vertical, but it's a vertical machine learning that, yes, it's good for hosting, but yes, it's also good for production APIs. It's also good for prototyping apps with spaces. We've also got the libraries that power all that you can also use as well. So it's more of I would say it's more of a kind of a rounded kind of solution to a kind of a kind of vertical. It's just a very, very wide one.
Yeah, very cool. I got nothing.
That explains it so much better to me. I was so confused about what it does, but like having like the GitHub face for like the models, and then you have the spaces to actually host the thing that you need, right? You have physical servers. Are those like located? Are they more like a CDN, or are they located in specific areas?
They are in specific areas. The AWS, I think everything's just AWS.
Are they built on AWS? Okay.
Yeah, as far as well,
Gotcha.
yeah. The spaces things are kind of, like I say, they're kind of you're more likely to hit the limits of what those resources can give you. But we've got more production focused products as well.
Gotcha.
I wanted to give a little bit of oh, okay. Do you need me to stop now, or?
Go on. I'll do it after.
Okay. All right. I wanted to give a little bit of context. So A100s are it looks like they're the chip of choice for machine learning. People are measuring their AI capacity by the amount of A100s they're stockpiling. Like literally, there's a chart out there going like number of A100s per company, and the people that have more win. And that's it's kind of like a nuclear arms race to me, which is pretty cool. But like one of the most magical experiences for me, like when I started looking at Hugging Face differently compared to GitHub, was you host Gradio UIs on Hugging Face on Spaces, and people can just run the models for free, which is not my normal experience for machine learning. Like you normally have to download it somewhere and run it yourself, right? Like doing this for free must cost a lot.
Yeah, it's not cheap, but in terms of making AI as accessible as possible, making papers reproducible, which at the minute is like really, if you've just got some code, it's like
just trust us. We got the results.
Yeah, exactly. So, encouraging people to build, a Gradio demo for the paper, which, we've had a lot of success with, is, game changing. So like for us, it's the important thing is to build this ecosystem, is to make sure people are using spaces. And you're right, it's a whole machine. It's a dedicated machine for these spaces apps. They don't necessarily have GPUs. So like the GPUs are, upgrades that you can pay for. We also have community grants that people can apply for. So if they've got an interesting kind of space that we think the world should be using, they can apply for a CPU grant, and we can award those temporarily as well. So, it's certainly a cost, but it's a measured one in terms of making machine learning as accessible as possible. Whether that's making it easier for researchers and ML engineers, or whether that's kind of opening the door to software engineers, which is obviously the biggest part of kind of tech, is software engineers who maybe have some familiarity with machine learning. They know what it is. Maybe they don't know how they would integrate it into their workflows and how they would use it. But these kind of Gradio demos, for example, is a good way to, build a proof of concept to show to stakeholders to get some buy-in so that they can maybe actually invest some serious funds into that.
Is A100 the Bitcoin miner of AI, or is it the graphics card of AI? Are people going to be building all this hardware and then it goes obsolete and you have to get the latest hardware because you want to do some specific task?
It's probably the kind of reference GPU of choice at the minute. There are cheaper ones. There are, I think, more expensive ones. There's innovations in hardware all the time, especially for machine learning, and there will be a newer, shinier version in 12 months.
Before we continue the conversation, here's a word from our sponsor again.
Vercel is the platform for front-end developers, providing the speed and reliability innovators need to create at the moment of inspiration. Founded by the creators of Next.js, Vercel has zero configuration support for 35 plus front-end frameworks, including SvelteKit. We enable the world's largest brands like Under Armour, eBay, and Nintendo to iterate faster and create quality software. Try out Vercel today to experience the easiest way to use Svelte.
So we talked about Huggingface then and A100s and all that cool stuff, but where does this all tie into Svelte? What does this have to do with Svelte?
Nothing at all, in honesty. But so, end of conversation. No, Svelte is used across all of Huggingface. So, pretty much a lot of what is kind of public facing, almost everything is kind of written in Svelte. So the hub is all Svelte. It's a relatively custom setup. We've got a couple of SvelteKit apps. So we've got our inference endpoints kind of landing page is a SvelteKit app. We've got a Huggingface store. Go buy our merch. That's a SvelteKit app. Gradio that I work on, which is a library, which I'll explain that in more detail in a moment, is also all of the front end is written in Svelte. So pretty much everything uses Svelte, but obviously, machine learning itself requires no UI. There is necessarily no Svelte involvement. There does seem to be a trend I've noticed over the past 12 to 18 months that Web3 and AI companies use Svelte. I don't know why that is. They just like new things, so they're just using the kind of shiniest thing. But
it's an interesting one because when I first started off in Web3, no one was using anything. The only thing that was available was the Ethereum SDK, and it was written in this dodgy JavaScript that was shoved through Browserify, and it barely worked at all. It was terrible. But I started building things called truffle boxes in Svelte. And so there was a few ways to build like a blockchain app, and one of them was using Svelte, and it was one of probably 5 ways to do it at the time. But then suddenly, when I sort of exited Web3 in 2017 or so, React took over, and React became the de facto way to build, anything, but also Web3 apps. So it's interesting now that the tide's turned again, and Svelte's become a good way to build them. And I think it's probably the kind of company, it's modern, it's faster in my mind than React. And I think it's also just kind of, it feels like it's, I don't know, a modern company, I think will look at Svelte as a good option for getting a front end up and running.
I know that.
I mean, it's easy.
In the AI kind of like sector, I know that Cohere are using Svelte. Cohere, another kind of AI startup, more kind of following the kind of OpenAI model, I think, where they're kind of closed source models with APIs to use them. But they're using Svelte, and they donated like $10,000 to the Open Collective about 6 months ago. So thanks. And Huggingface as well are using Svelte. So
there was a protocol I was quite involved with back in the day called Melon Protocol. And it was by two people. And one interesting, the reason it stuck in my mind is because the lady was called Mona Elisa, one of the ones who owned it. And I thought that's the best name I've ever heard in my entire life. And so, but the guy, and unfortunately I've forgotten his name, sorry, but he sort of, when I was early days as a maintainer on Svelte, he appeared in the Discord and he was rebuilding Melon Protocol's website in Svelte. And I was like, well, that's interesting. That's sort of unexpected. Also, the guy designed the protocol, also writing the front end, but there you go. Just a tidbit, that one.
I want to offer some thoughts on this, like why people are using or just like investing in UI. Like essentially, both machine learning and Web3, there are a bunch of opaque APIs that are not super usable to the general population. Like everyone's interested in mass consumer usage of that, and for that you need user interfaces. And I very much think like, you know, there's a movement in machine learning of like there's a lot of research being done on foundational models, but it's not super accessible. Stable diffusion itself is not super accessible. You kind of have to build the UI around it, and that's kind of what people are investing in there. I think that's the opportunity for front-end developers to get involved with AI as well, to essentially reinterpret it for regular people to actually make use of this stuff. You know, I'll point out two more things, which is there's a lot of these are Python ecosystem things. Gradio itself was an acquisition. It was a startup independently and then was acquired into Huggingface. And Streamlit is another one that was acquired by Snowflake for $800 million. And these are basically Python to UI interfaces, where you like people just write Python and a UI is generated. And that's kind of the context, which is like, I know Python, I have my machine learning thing or my data thing or whatever my thing is. And I want to make a user interface without being a UI expert. And essentially what Gradio is, from my point of view, is it's a bunch of Svelte experts creating components that are accessible in Python. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's Python. Python people want to write Python, so you know the whole JavaScript ecosystem is totally inaccessible to those people. So Streamlit and Gradio are two different approaches. There are differences. There are things they're good at, things that they're not as good at.
Do you have opinion? I would love to know what's the similarities and differences.
They're getting more and more similar. I'll say that much. I mean, the big difference is that Streamlit has its own custom interpreter, so which kind of allows for this very, very kind of clean line by line kind of, you know, you can build up a UI kind of line by line. It's very kind of intuitive, but the way they do that is with a custom interpreter. And Gradio, we have a goal that we need to run in like Google Colab. We want to be able to run anywhere without, you know, basically being more portable. So we want to kind of stay as a, you know, this is kind of very kind of interestingly, the kind of React Svelte kind of, you know, one of the old arguments was, you know, this kind of compiler is this really heavy abstraction. It's basically, you know, Svelte isn't a library, it's a language, which is kind of, you know, arguably true. And it's kind of a similar sort of thing where Streamlit to a degree is its own language. It has its own semantics outside of Python, whereas Gradio is just a plain kind of Python script that you can run in any context. But obviously, the mechanics of the way they work, this will probably change over time. Like over the past kind of 9 months, Gradio has become more similar to Streamlit. Gradio used to be just this simple, you know, here are your input components that are going to pass some data to a predict function, and here are the output components that, you know, the output of that predict function, you know, function is going to take those outputs and display them. Whereas now you can build more complex UIs as we've added more APIs. So kind of becoming more similar to Streamlit. But the way in which they run is, at the minute, like Streamlit kind of runs top to bottom. So it kind of reruns when you change things pretty much completely. You can cache some things and it knows when things haven't changed, so it can kind of optimize. But fundamentally, that's kind of how it works. It's kind of runs top to bottom with some kind of caching, memoization sort of tricks. I think that will, you know, they've published a roadmap recently that's really interesting, and that will change. Gradio is a bit more kind of selective, and you can say, I only want these kind of things to update when this predict function runs. But you've got to kind of manually define those dependencies. That's something we are also hoping to, you know, improve in a future version as well. So they are kind of getting more and more similar. But that whole custom interpreter, you know, just pure Python remains true and probably will remain true for both of those tools.
It's interesting that the rendering philosophy matches React versus Svelte, you know, rendering top to bottom versus partial updates. Cool.
So what are some cool like, I guess, Gradio apps is what would you call them?
Yeah, apps. I think the most popular ones, so what is now Crayon was DALL-E Mini, and that was kind of probably the most popular, even to this day, even with Stable Diffusion kind of taking over the world. DALL-E Mini was on a different level. We were getting like 50 million generations a day. The mass usage of DALL-E Mini was absurd. Probably kind of at machine learning genuinely at scale, like in ways that only certain organizations have had to do before. So that was definitely huge. That is now kind of Crayon is like its own product now, and that's no longer using kind of Gradio and spaces. But that was the big one. That would kind of like was very, very popular, and that was everywhere on Twitter. And that had the unique kind of element of people who knew nothing about machine learning, people who knew nothing about tech, were having fun and playing with machine learning kind of like en masse for maybe the first time in a long time. So that was huge.
I guess we could kind of explain what the DALL-E Mini actually is. It's like a image generation tool, right?
Yes. These are all text. These have become very, very popular. I think partly because they work very well on Twitter. They're text to image generation models. So you give it a description and the AI will generate an image based on that. It will often generate like a selection of images based on that. And there's a really great Twitter account like Weird DALL-E Mini, which kind of posts really strange generations. And DALL-E Mini kind of lended itself well to this because it's quite stylized. It had a very specific look to it. So it often came out with some very bizarre images. Stable Diffusion does as well, but Stable Diffusion is incredibly realistic. So it's in some ways it's kind of has less novelty effect than DALL-E Mini.
Yeah, you want different art styles. One thing, yeah. So I linked. I have actually been following Weird DALL-E Generations, the Twitter account, because it's funny. There's often a little bit of a social message involved, and I just saw that they reached 1 million followers, which is absurd to me. It's just
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to be very clear about was Crayon or DALL-E Mini created by Huggingface or like a third party, and you were just the host of it?
Yep, third party. We collaborated with Boris Dimer, and the folks that were building it, and we want it was open source. There was a lot of kind of I don't know. It feels like sometimes this stuff is made open source almost as a response to OpenAI's very aggressively closed source nature, which has kind of changed recently. Actually, open source
Closed AI.
yeah, it's a ironic thing, but so it was this kind of open source model, and we collaborated with the folks that built that model. It's not an internal Huggingface tool in the same way that Stable Diffusion. Again, the initial demos kind of that were hosted and the models were hosted on Huggingface, but that's just a collaboration with another organization as well. So it was, and then kind of Boris and the team wanted to try and build a product around DALL-E Mini, so they kind of created Crayon, which is what is now DALL-E Mini. Yeah. And that became self-hosted, and they did their own UI and they did their own thing.
And for those listening, Crayon is the regular word crayon with the AI in it. So CRAIYON.
Yeah, Crayon.
Crayon. I just like 50 million generations. That's a lot of money, and I'm just trying to really go like, all right, who paid for that? I know there's a queue.
Yeah. So I don't know the details on this. We definitely.
I'm just asking this just because that's a really good way to host things, and I'm like, what's the limit on this?
Yeah. So DALL-E Mini was like a pretty custom setup. So typically when you create a Gradio app, it spawns a fast API for you, and it gets kind of built into this Docker container and so on and so forth. But you can also, if you want to, you can call external APIs and stuff if you're hosting elsewhere. And that was the situation with DALL-E Mini. It had its own custom backend, and there was, I think various, I don't know if we sponsored that or only we sponsored that, or if other people were also sponsoring that as well. But there was definitely a bunch of, the backend was like a totally custom backend, and the Gradio app was actually a static app, essentially hosted on Spaces that called out to this API that had its own queue, and it did like a bunch of batching and stuff on its own. So we didn't actually enable our queue, because then it would have meant that they couldn't use their queue. So they had their own queue. It was its own kind of custom set of infrastructure that we provided. We definitely provided a lot of support around that. But in terms of who actually foot the bill, I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I don't mean to pry. I'm just like, this might be one of, like, I would love to make something like that. And I have no idea how much effort or money it takes to run something like that. That's pretty crazy. Yeah. But it's so fun. It really is so fun.
Yeah. Any other kind of applications that you want to shout out that are fun to play around with, or like how do you get started with Gradio?
Right.
Yeah, I think you can go and like browse our spaces. So if you go to huggingface.co/spaces, you can actually go and browse spaces. We have like lists of trending spaces. So if you wanted to explore the different kinds of things that people are doing, then you can go and take a look at that. I think like the most popular one at the minute is obviously Stable Diffusion Web UI. So this is a pretty complex web UI around stable diffusion, which is again another text to image generation model, very, very kind of like high quality image generations. And the web UI allows you to kind of tweak the parameters. It's a pretty complex model. You can make lots of kind of like tweaks and things. And that has become very, very kind of popular. You can create a Google Colab and kind of fork and take a look at that. You can run it locally. And what's interesting about Stable Diffusion now is, of course, people have started to fine tune, with Dream Booth. So they've started to kind of make their own kind of, you can fine tune on a relatively small set of data to create like different kind of styles and stuff. And they've become, I guess they've kind of viral in a much smaller kind of sense. They're a bit more specialist. It's a little bit more like technical to do that. But that's been an interesting kind of offshoot. And interesting, Sean, you were talking earlier about community and ecosystem. Again, like entire mini communities are built up around these things, and they're setting up their own kind of sites to share all of the different models that they've generated so people can play around with them. Everyone's frightened. Is Disney going to sue me because I've trained my model on a lot of Disney images and stuff? All those kind of questions start opening up. But yeah, Stable Diffusion is it became popular, but it's what's been impressive is how people have kind of continued to play with it, continued to kind of find new and interesting use cases. And it's even today, it's still pretty constant. It's still pretty popular with people using it. And that's definitely worth checking out if you like image generation models anyway.
Yeah. So the perspective I would give there is, you said it was less popular, but I'm not sure about that, because that's the Dream Booth fine tuning is where I saw it cross over on YouTube. Because people are, and the way that I would frame this is, people are most interested in themselves. And so there's a qualitative difference between you being able to type any text and then it generates any image, and you being able to type any text and it puts you in that image. Puts your friend, puts your loved one, puts your pet, whatever it is, right? Like, people are very interested in themselves, and those I think the video that went viral was from Corridor Digital, where they like told a story with their coworkers. And inserted themselves in that story, and it just became that much more interesting just because that's a face I work with every single day. And some of the more interesting productized businesses would be Avatar AI, which is the same thing. And so like what I would qualify there is, like, there's these foundational models like Stable Diffusion. Fine tuning is kind of that last mile thing that people add on top of that. That requires a lot of UI work and yes, additional machine learning training, but like that actually makes it more useful to the end user who is ultimately interested in their use case and their own specific constraints and needs. So, well, I mean, if we're ending off on the Gradio thing, I wanted to ask, like, I think just the general sense of like UI generators, or like, not many people work on this. Essentially what you're working on, which is you're interpreting some, intention of a developer and then creating in a sort of a low code fashion UI, right? And I think that's a very interesting and rare use case of front end frameworks that you probably stretch Svelte in some interesting ways. And I thought that there might be an opportunity to comment on some lesser known APIs that provide you a lot of value that people may not know about.
Yeah, I think. So at a very high level, you can kind of see kind of something like Gradio as it's a framework. fundamentally. And we often talk about this, that, when we're looking for new people, we're more interested in people that got experience building frameworks than experience in machine learning, because, Gradio is very much positioned as a, make web UIs for your machine learning kind of models, but you can build anything. You can build like normal web apps like with it. And the big difference is, instead of like the DOM being our primitive, like it is in Svelte or React, like we have these kind of components that are our primitives. So you can't render, this H1 or that, paragraph tag. You can render our image component, which itself is a very, very complex thing. So most of our work, especially in the front end, is, we spend a lot of time with relatively low level APIs, maybe with Canvas APIs, with audio APIs, with video APIs, with, who knows in the future with, WebGL is something that we'll be utilizing in the future as well. So a lot of our work is spent just doing kind of web API stuff. In terms of the Svelte, it can get a bit tricky sometimes to process all of this, to take this, essentially the way it works in Gradio is we have a configuration that gets generated by the Python backend and gets passed down to the front end, and that, you want to see it as like almost a virtual DOM representation or a virtual component representation, then you can. It's a tree of components that Svelte will then render. And I mean, dynamic components, Svelte : component is your friend in this case. So it's recursively rendering all these components. But I think the difficult thing is having an architecture that supports kind of managing all of that state. So there's all of this states that you have for your components, and that might be props that are being set at the very kind of like high level that you need to pass down. But then those props can potentially change throughout the life cycle of the application, and you need to ensure that your kind of config reflects that. You need to be able to, if you were to show and hide something, can you rehydrate with the same state? But you also kind of start to face challenges where, because the kind of the code, all of our kind of event handlers, what would be an event handler in Svelte, like that's written in Python, and that involves a kind of like a server round trip to a degree. So we have, for example, we have certain like change events on certain components. So if the value changes, that event is triggered, and we have a handler for that, and that's a function written in Python. So you can almost see this, it's a little bit like, it doesn't work in the same way, at least not at the minute, as Elixir live view. But it's that same kind of, cycle. We do use WebSockets and stuff for various reasons. And maybe we'll go more granular with updates in the way that kind of live view does in the future. But it's kind of that process where this manage some state or something up here, make some changes. You want to pass that down to a component, and that's, request response cycles. So you do have a problem though when, say, you've got some internal state for a component. If you're going to dismount and remount that component, you're going to lose the internal representation of state, which you might need, say, if you're working with Canvas, you might want to send just images up to your API to do something with, to run a prediction on. But internally, you might have like a bunch of paths. You might have some, mathematical representations of like vectors that you're drawing onto a canvas and stuff. And you could potentially lose all of that internal state. So having a way to serialize both the state that your API cares about and the state that your front end cares about is, really important. And we've had issues in the past where maybe we were, our kind of like state mechanisms were a little bit, too naive, and in some ways they still are, and they need to be kind of improved as you want to do more with the framework. And maybe it's performance optimization, so you're only kind of sending partial updates and stuff. Maybe it is that idea of mounting and dismounting, but it means you need to think kind of carefully about how your kind of front end and your back end are talking to one another, because we have this hard requirement that users write Python. And there are escape hatches for JavaScript, but that means anything that you potentially want to do, hiding and showing a button, you should be able to do that in Python. So that's, it poses interesting challenges when you need to try and work across languages. And it also, introduces UX challenges, like if we want people to be able to show and hide a button in Python, and that involves a server round trip, is that going to deliver the performance that we need? Are there some new APIs we can add to support this use case, some shorthands that can, make the UX, faster? So it definitely has a number of challenges that you just don't, you don't have to face in, and a lot of hard constraints that you simply don't have to face in, building a typical product, for example.
Yeah. Cool. It's a great explanation. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, and you're still hiring, right?
Yeah, we are hiring. So we are looking for a front-end engineer. So it's advertised on our Huggingface website as a front-end engineer, fully remote. The whole company is remote. And, we're looking for someone, a Svelte person would be good, but really someone who really has some experience with those core web APIs I was talking about, someone who's comfortable on MDN and implementing things at a relatively low level is ideally what we're looking for.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. All right. So I think that's it for all of the topics, unless you have something else that you want to add.
Well, I was going to mention SvelteKit. You have some SvelteKit apps. For those listening and who are not on Twitter, there are 8 issues left, apparently, on SvelteKit 1.0's roadmap, which means maybe soon. We don't know. But I just wanted to leave some opportunity for people to comment on the maturity of SvelteKit and how people are excited about it.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be getting SvelteKit pretty soon. I feel like it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Feel it.
All right.
We're getting the side eye.
A lot of silence from the 2 maintainers on this call.
We're definitely in the last stretch, right? Like we're feeling kind of positive. Yeah. Obviously, there's still a lot to do. We've got we feel very strongly that the other stuff, the docs and the tutorials and all of that sort of stuff needs to be there. When we release, like it's not 1.0 without like a really great kind of, whether it's a adoption story, whether it's kind of how you integrate, how you deploy, the whole end to end, the tutorials and all of that sort of stuff needs to be there. Partly because you're nothing without your documentation, but also partly because you only get one chance to launch, and if you screw it up, you don't get another chance. Especially with the hype that's been building around SvelteKit for the past. I don't even know how long it's been. So we
2
need
years
to
probably.
make sure that it's been years, like literally been years. But we need to make sure that everything's like in the right place when we launch. So we're taking care of that. So there's no time scale, but it's not. Things are going well.
Yeah, yeah.
What a tease!
And
all right, so
I'm seeing 1 issue being merged right now, so hopefully it'll be 7 by the end of this podcast. Who knows?
Oof, exciting. Yeah. So let's move on to the fun part of the episodes. No, I'm just kidding. Unpopular opinions. Do you guys have any? Let's hear.
Oh, we didn't tell Pngwn to prepare one, but we'll leave him to the end. But Brittany, you want to go first?
Kevin ruined mine. No, mine was just that Svelte will stay on top of React based on the NPM surveys, or download numbers, whatever. I was just giving people shit. It's fine.
I think Sean stole mine. I mean, didn't know it was mine, to be fair. And then he's changed it, and it's even worse now because, I have another one.
No, go for
Let's
it.
Hear it.
Sean, do you want to go with, because you said it first anyway? So do you want to go with the original one as well?
Well, no. I think last week we had this conversation about is Twitter dying or will it last? And I think my my thoughts over the past week have been Twitter as you knew it is already gone. And primarily, there's just a lot of discussion about how Twitter will run, the uptime and downtime. But just the community nature of Twitter seems to be permanently gone. And let's just say the ownership changes again, and it goes back to normal. I think just the illusion that this is a space that you can invest in permanently is gone now, and people are definitely diversifying. And I think definitely Mastodon usage is growing, is picking up. I've tried it out recently. It seems to be more developed than I thought. And in particular, I think the data science and developer community are converging on 2 servers, sigmoid.social. I think Pngwn, you're there on Sigmoid. I just created an account as well. And then the general tech community, I think, is on Hachiderm or Hachyderm. And I think that's going to be it going forward. There's just going to be diversification of tech community from Twitter to Twitter and Mastodon. Obviously, with other existing like TikTok and LinkedIn, but the text-based ones, people are definitely diversifying.
Even as of last week, like I would have agreed with you, but after seeing like the movement, I feel like it's just a small percentage of people. Like it seems like my circle is kind of moving towards Mastodon, but I don't know if the bigger, greater like Twitter ecosystem of developers is really moving that much.
It's enough that like people are clicking like that backup button on Twitter, right? Like that just like
that
people,
is happening.
The trust is gone. You just don't you don't default to believing that everything that you have on there will stay up, will be accessible at all times. You don't default to believing that there will be decent moderation on the platform. And you don't believe that the timeline will not be taken over by some main character energy that like is completely distracting and irrelevant to the things that you actually want to spend time on. So for that reason, I think there's just a number of people who are just permanently off Twitter. There are a number of people who are not permanently off Twitter, but like at least significantly diversified away, and therefore, as a content creator, like that matters. As someone who I put a lot of my public thinking online for me to search later on. Like it's specifically for me. I have to start thinking about like moving it somewhere else. Like I just cannot risk putting it on there anymore.
That's the conversations that we're having a lot too. I'm on Mastodon, but like companies are starting to think about like coming to Mastodon. I'm like, Mastodon is not a place really for companies right now. Like I think they would get kicked off, basically. Well, we should share all of our Mastodons on the show notes too, just in case anybody's interested.
Well, hang on. So Anthony's against this. So you go ahead.
Well, no. So I'm confused now because everyone's read out my unpopular opinion, and I didn't even say it. But and that was the one that I took because Sean saw my first one, and now Sean's first one that I had originally is now disappeared entirely. So I'm so confused. But I will respond. My only thing is I just don't think Mastodon's usable for anyone outside of tech. Really, I think it's just people have struggles. The regular people have struggles handling a username and password, and I don't think that Mastodon is really accessible for them. So I just don't think it's going to. It might be where tech Twitter goes, but I think that'll be it. Which is probably what you're saying, really. I just don't think it's got the usability, and even the name's not that appealing. It's some kind of random. I don't know what it relates to actually. What Mastodon is, but it's something sci-fi, I assume. And
what?
Yeah,
no, it's a big elephant.
Is it a big elephant?
It's real.
It's yeah.
Sounds sci-fi
My elephant
to
knowledge
me.
is not great, so yeah, sci-fi elephant.
It was
extinct, right? They're extinct precursors to elephants.
Yeah. Out of the 5 Megazords, Mastodon was the Black Ranger Megazord.
Wait, hang on a minute. And this is not sci-fi. Are we sure this is not sci-fi?
No, based on dinosaurs.
Megazord. Are you sure? Megazord. I don't know. I think you're all trolling me.
Share your other unpopular opinion because it needs to be said.
It needs to be said. Yeah, it's kind of Sean and mine. And it sounds like it's a few people's and it's not unpopular at all. But MDSveX should be part of Svelte. And the only reason I sort of thought this the other day is because setting up MDSveX, you've got to follow some instructions and stick it in there. And I feel like I would actually want projects to be able to like add a folder, add a file with, let's say, MDS, a more acceptable file name, Pngwn, MDS or something, and then and it just work out of the box. And I think that would be something a language should have, because I see a lot of people's when everyone mentions JSX on Twitter, they always in the same sentence mention MDX, right? It's almost like they go hand in hand, and we don't have JSX for obvious reasons, but I think if we had like MDS or whatever it's going to be, as part of the core, I think it's a huge win. Documentation is important.
That's absolutely true. And I think that would put us up a little bit on Astro too, because Astro has like that MDX support out of the box. And even though you can use Svelte in it, you can kind of use Svelte along with MDX, but I think it should be integrated at this point.
I don't think it needs to be a core package for that to be the case. To have a really easy experience with SvelteKit. It could easily be pre-configured. But I'm probably the barrier to it becoming core. Like, I'm probably the only person who thinks that shouldn't be the case.
So that's interesting that You think that it shouldn't be the case. With Svelte add command, though, it is very easy to set up. So I guess I will say that it is very easy to add in, and you don't necessarily need it to be, but it would be nice to have just access to it out of the box, I guess.
Megasword commands you. How about that?
I make it required in all my templates. I think it's just a better way to author most pages by default. Unless you really need to write HTML, then go ahead and do that. But otherwise, most people were better off choosing MDSveX. I mean, I also configure it with a lot of like Remark plugins and stuff. So there will never be zero config MDSveX. It's just a question of how much config and how much setup.
I wonder that too, like if we could get like actually a package to render the markdown built into it also, that would be nice.
Okay.
Like you said, you use Remark and stuff, and like you have to add more configuration to it. That would be.
Yes. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll go quickly on my one. So I think every developer needs to be AI literate. I think this is not a fad. I think everyone needs to know how to leverage AI as part of their jobs, because it will increasingly be part of knowledge work. And that's the long and short of it. I picked Copilot last time, but this is just more general. Like, play around with these things, because you will be using more and more of them over the next 10 years.
Absolutely agree.
Valid, and now I have something else to learn.
There's always something else to learn, Brittany.
Yeah. So I have
Exactly.
I have a repo going. If you want to learn along with me, I have a repo for prompt engineering, which is what people are calling. Let's just call it like for people who are unaware, the progression of software 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So 1.0 is us writing code manually. Software 2.0 is data defining code from specific machine learning cases. 3.0 is using large foundational models and understanding how to interface with it, but not training your own models. So all of those are levels of AI to which I think the developer needs to understand, because these are new forms of software.
3.0 is cryptography. Come on, Sean.
I think there's a space for Pngwn if you have an unpopular opinion you want to shout out.
So leading off, I have two, just like as a riffing off some of the things that have been spoken. The first one is that if the destruction of Twitter, whatever happens, does lead to fragmentation of communities, that's probably, I think, a good thing. And it's one of the best things that could happen to the internet is if these communities started to build up in a space that made sense for them, rather than defaulting to some generic platform that might not actually be the best environment for them to actually communicate. Maybe artists going back to a more art-specific platform, maybe engineers and tech folk going to a platform that better facilitates communication about tech in whatever way that makes sense. And other celebrities can go to TikTok or something. Where maybe platforms where rage is not the most valuable currency isn't a bad thing for discourse online. But yeah, and my second one is basically leading off what you've just said, Sean, is that I think that AI companies are not doing a very good job of reaching outside of the AI bubble, not reaching outside of existing ML ecosystems to software engineers and figuring paths for, and I think there's an element of like a meeting in the middle, like you say. Software engineers need to do the work to understand what's available, what the ecosystem looks like, what the current state of the art is, and what's happening. It moves incredibly quickly. Month by month, you don't know really what's going to be going on. But on the same token, all of these AI ML companies building these tools and services and platforms need to do a better job of reaching out to software engineers, which is, of course, a colossal market that absolutely dwarfs the kind of like the ML ecosystem. There's still more software engineers than there are ML folk, and I think there needs to be more work to reach out to those people, which is obviously conversations that we at Huggingface have all the time, but I'm sure it's a conversation other AI companies and startups and stuff are having. But it has to happen, and whoever does the best job of that is going to like win at the end of the day. If they can bring those people in early before they've become super literate in AI, then they will kind of like win out in the end.
All right.
Cool.
on your first point, I just wanted to say the only thing that I worry about with that diversification is I do think it's good that communities are breaking up. I just wonder if it's going to make them kind of shallow and in their bubbles and not get outside viewpoints. And for politics, especially, like that worries me. That I guess it doesn't spread outside the bubble, but it worries me that people aren't seeing other people's viewpoints and things.
That's a good point. All right. So I don't have one, an unpopular opinion. Well, I have many, but not today. I don't have time.
Good pick.
Yeah, picks. What do you guys have? Brittany.
Mine is just a TV show I've been binging, and I hate that it comes out once a week because it's so good. I want to actually binge it and just watch the whole thing. It's The Peripheral.
Double agreed.
And I just got the book, so I'm going to download it and put it on my Kindle and spoil the ending for myself because I need to read the book now.
There's a book? I need to get that as well.
Book series, I think. Yeah.
Ooh.
I know,
Exciting.
right?
Yes. Yeah, it's really nice. I've been binge watching it as well.
Anthony?
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to get Kev to pronounce mine.
Herregud, Unpopular.
That's the one.
So what's this, Anthony?
It's a show from the 80s that I discovered, well, a film from the 80s where I was like a bunch of sketches together from the 80s from Sweden that I discovered randomly on Netflix. It decided that it was the kind of thing I would like. It was to a good extent right, to be fair. I think my dad would like it more. But yeah, it's basically like, it's actually restored. And this scared me a bit because we're now restoring footage from the 80s. I mean, I was alive then. That's terrifying. But yeah, it's just a very, very strange. The guy seems obsessed with the telephone, which is even worse. Very strange.
It's like
slapsticky.
a collection of comedy sketch stuff, right?
Yeah, like a film made out of a bunch of sketches that are very, very clearly defined. Actually, so it's not like a contiguous sort of line, but yeah, it's very strange, and it entertained me, maybe laugh for a bit. So I just thought I'd write that down so maybe someone else could get exposed to it.
Yeah, everyone should watch it.
It's funny. It is funny.
Ever the esoteric picks? Yeah, sorry.
It's definitely esoteric. I was going to say that the one sketch that actually was really properly cracked me up was the last one in that film. So if you decide it's not for you and skip the rest, you should watch the last sketch where they're sat at a restaurant, because I think that one was great.
If it's on YouTube, we can try and link it up. Well, mine's very simple. One of the more interesting companies other than Huggingface would be Runway ML. I think they recently raised the Series B, and essentially it's a video AI toolkit. If you're thinking about, I think, After Effects or some kind of other video editing tool, they're basically applying the entire every single advance in AI. They'll sort of reproduce it and offer it as a product, so you can sort of use to edit your videos. And their demos are super cool. So if you haven't seen this, I linked a video in the show notes.
All right, Pngwn, do you have a pick, sir? A pick could be a movie, could be a film, could be a something you enjoyed lately.
Something you like. The thing is, we like to spring these on guests without any preparation whatsoever. Yes. I don't know why we like that. It's quite bad.
Okay.
We don't really like that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just go with a really local choice, but there's a restaurant here in Amsterdam called Terra Zen, and it does this like Japanese kind of Caribbean fusion kind of food, and it's incredible. So if you're ever in Amsterdam, go to Terra Zen and eat at this restaurant. That's my top pick.
Swear you have told, or you're the second person that I've heard this from in like 2 weeks, and I've never been to Amsterdam, and this restaurant must be amazing because like I now need to go to Amsterdam just to go to this restaurant.
It's really good. It was featured in a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago or something, actually. So I think it's become more popular recently. We even had to, it's down some random side street. It's a tiny little place, and we had to wait at like lunchtime to get a table. So it's definitely worth a visit.
Is it Japanese Rastafarian?
It's kind of hard to place. It's very fusiony. Like the menu is like pretty weird, but they do have like there are like Japanese people who work there, or like I don't know if like one of the founders is Japanese and one is Rastafarian or from the Caribbean or something. It's But obviously it's a very strange kind of fusion. But it's like the food is very, very good. So come to Amsterdam.
It says, we serve Caribbean and Japanese soul food according to Rastafarian principles. What the hell what is Rastafarian principles?
I can't speak for that.
It's great. Okay.
All right. I think that's it for this week. And thanks for joining us, Pngwn. It was
Thank
a long
you for
time
having
coming.
me. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you in a bit when we do an episode on MDSveX, maybe.
Yeah, should be fun.
And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. All right, bye.
Later.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.